Hello guys. So today we're doing a creepypasta called Laughing Jack. Now, some of you guys have heard of Laughing Jack, and I did read his origin, but there is another form of the story that I did not read, and it is a story from a woman who had a son, a 5-year-old son actually, named James, and both of them had a little run-in with Laughing Jack. Now, I read his origin, I think. Otherwise, I did read it on my other channel that got cancelled or demonetized or deleted, however you put it. I think I read it. His actual origin was Isaac. But if I didn't read it with Isaac, I'll definitely read it. But for this one, it is Laughing Jack 2. So it starts on a nice summer day when James, my 5-year-old son, James, was playing outside in the backyard of our suburban home. James has always been a quiet boy. He plays by himself mostly. He never had many friends, but he has always had a wild imagination. I was in the kitchen feeding our dog Fido when I heard it that sounded like James talking to someone in the backyard. I'm not sure who it was he could be talking to. Could he have finally made a friend? Being a single mom, it's hard for me to always keep an eye on my son, so I decided to go outside and check on him. When I went into the backyard, I was a bit confused because James was the only person back there. Was he talking to himself? I could have sworn I heard another voice. "James, it's time to come inside," I called out to him. He came inside and sat down at the kitchen table. It was about lunchtime, so I decided to make him a turkey sandwich. "James, who are you talking to out there?" I asked. James looked at me. "I was playing with my new friend," he said, smiling. I gave him some milk and continued to pry, as any good mother would. "Does your friend have a name?" "Why didn't you ask him to have lunch with us?" I asked. James stared at me for a moment before replying. "His name is Laughing Jack." I was a bit taken aback by what he said. "Oh, that's a strange name. What does your friend look like?" I asked him, confused. "He's a clown. He has long hair and a big swirly cone nose. He's got long arms and baggy pants with stripy socks, and he always smiles." I realized my son was talking about an imaginary friend. I suppose it's normal for kids his age to have imaginary friends, especially when he has no real kids to play with. It's probably just a phase. The rest of the day went by as per usual, and it was starting to get late, so I put James to bed. I tucked him in, gave him a kiss, and made sure to turn on his nightlight before I closed the door. I was pretty worn out myself, so I decided to go to bed not long after. I had an awful nightmare. It was dark. I was in some kind of run-down amusement park. I was scared, running through an endless field of empty tents, broken down rides, and abandoned game huts. The whole place had a horrible look to it. Everything was black and white. The prized stuffed animals all hung from the nooses in the game huts, all with sick grins stitched on their faces. It felt like the whole park was looking at me, even though there wasn't another living thing in sight. Then suddenly I began to hear music play. The sound of "Pop Goes the Weasel" being played on a squeeze box echoed through the park. It was hypnotizing. I followed its tune to the circus tent, almost in a trance, unable to stop my legs from moving forward. It was pitch black. The only light came from a single spotlight shining on the center of the big top. As I walked towards the light, the music slowed down. I found myself singing along, unable to stop. All around the mulberry bush, the monkey chased the weasel. The monkey thought 'twas all in fun. The music stopped right before its climax, and suddenly the lights shot on. The intensity of the lights was practically blinding. All I could see was a dark silhouette, shuffled towards me. Then another one appeared, and another, and another. There were dozens of them, all coming towards me. I couldn't move. My legs were frozen. All I could do was watch as the haunting figures drew nearer. As they got closer, I could see. They were children. As I looked at each one, I noticed they were all horribly disfigured and mutilated. Some had cuts all over their body. Others were severely burnt. And others were missing limbs, even eyes. The children enveloped me, clawing at my flesh, dragging me to the ground, and tearing inside me. As the children tore me apart and I faded away, all I could hear was laughter. Horrible, awful, evil laughter. I woke up the next morning in a cold sweat. After taking a few deep breaths, I looked over and saw that a few of James' action figures were positioned facing me on top of my nightstand. I sighed. James had probably woken up early and put these here. I gathered up the toys and made my way to James' room. However, when I opened the door, James was sound asleep. I just shrugged and placed the toys back into his toy box and walked to the living room. A little while later, James woke up and made him his breakfast. He was quiet and seemed a bit groggy. Perhaps he didn't sleep well either. I asked him about the toys. James, honey, did you put the toys in Mommy's room this morning? He looked at me, then quickly glanced down at his cereal. Laughing Jack did it. I rolled my eyes and responded, well, you tell Laughing Jack to keep the boys' toys in your room. James nodded and finished up his breakfast, then decided to go play in the backyard. I went to relax in the living room, and I must have dozed off because I woke up a couple hours later. Shit, I need to check on James. I was a bit worried. It'd been over 2 hours and I haven't checked on him. I walked to the backyard, but James wasn't there anymore. I was getting nervous, so I called out to him. James? James, where are you? Just then I heard a laugh come from the front yard. I went there and there was James sitting on the sidewalk. I breathed a sigh of relief and walked over. Then I saw him holding something. James, what are you eating? He looked at me and then he reached into his pocket, holding a handful of candies. This made me worried. James, who gave you that candy? James just looked at me, but didn't say anything. James, please tell Mommy where you got that candy. James looked down and said, Laughing Jack gave it to me. My heart sunk. I kneeled down to look him in the eye. James, I've had enough of this damn Laughing Jack thing. He is not real. Now this is a very serious situation and I need to know who gave you the candy. I could see him start to cry. But Mama, Laughing Jack did give me the candy. I closed my eyes and took a deep breath. James has never lied to me. But what he's telling me is impossible. I made him spit out the candy and I threw the rest away. James appears to be fine. Maybe I'm just overreacting. After all, he could have gotten it from Tom and Linda from next door, or Mr. Walker down the street. Either way, I'm going to have to keep a closer eye on James. That night, I put him to bed as usual, and decided to go to bed early myself. Suddenly, I was woken up by a loud bang coming from the kitchen. I jumped out of bed and hurried down the stairs. When I got to the kitchen, I was horrified. Everything on the counter has been thrown on the floor, and our dog, Fido, hung dead from the light fixture. His stomach was cut open and stuffed with candy. The same type that James was eating earlier that day. My shock was quickly broken by a sharp scream coming from James' room, followed by loud crashes. I grabbed a knife from the drawer and went to his room. I burst through the door and flipped on the lights. Everything in the room was knocked over and tossed on the floor. And James, my poor son, in his bed, crying and shaking with fear, a pool of urine staining the sheets. I scooped him up and ran out of the house and went next door to Tom and Linda's house. Luckily, they were still awake. They let me use their phone and I called the police. It hadn't taken them long to arrive, and I explained what had happened. They looked at me as if I was crazy. They searched the house, but all they found was a dead dog and 2 trashed rooms. also told me that someone had probably gotten into the house and done this right before making a quick escape when they heard me coming up the stairs. I knew it wasn't true. All the doors were locked, and none of the windows were open. Whatever was in my house didn't come from the side. The next day, my son stayed inside. I didn't want him to leave my sight. I went to the garage and found his old baby monitor, and I set up in his room. If anything comes into his room tonight, I was going to be able to hear it. I went to the kitchen and got a knife. Put it on my nightstand. Imaginary friend or not, I'm not letting anything hurt my little boy. Soon enough, night came. I put James to bed. He was afraid, but I promised him that I wasn't going to let anything happen to him. I tucked him in, gave him a kiss, and turned on the night light. Before closing the door, I whispered to him, "Good night, James. I love you." I tried to stay up as long as I could, but after a few hours, I felt that I needed to sleep. Just as I lay on my head on the pillow, I heard a soft noise come from the baby monitor that I had put on my nightstand. At first it sounded like some kind of interference, like a kind of radio would make. And then I heard a soft moan. Was James still asleep? Then I heard it. The laugh. The laugh from my nightmare, that horrible laugh. I sprang up from bed and grabbed the knife from under my pillow. I rushed to James' room and I creaked the door open. I tried the light switch, but it wouldn't come on. I took a step in and I could feel the warm, thick liquid on my feet. Suddenly, James' nightlight came on, and I could see the absolute horror laid out in front of me. Now, for the rest of the story, it is very gory, very bloody, very sickening, it is disturbing, it is disgusting, it is depressing. Now, I'm putting this warning because if you have depression, suicidal thoughts, any of the following mental sickness, or you're eating something and you're very easily disgusted, right now I would advise you to not listen and go watch something happier. But if you're still here and you heard my warning and didn't heed it, what comes next? Do not blame me. James' body was nailed up on the wall, the nails piercing through his hands and feet. His chest was cut wide open, and his organs hung down to the floor. His eyes and tongue had been removed along with most of his teeth. I was disgusted. I could hardly believe this was my baby boy. Then I heard again the soft, desperate moans. James was still alive. My baby. My poor baby. In so much pain, barely clinging to life. I ran across the room and vomited on the floor. But my sickness was interrupted by a horrible cackle coming from behind me. I turned around, still wiping the bile from my mouth. Then out of the shadows emerged the fiend, responsible for all this horror. Laughing Jack. His ghost-white skin and matted black hair hung down to his shoulders. He had piercing white eyes, surrounded by dark black rings. His twisted smile revealed a row of sharp, jagged teeth. And his skin didn't look like skin at all. It almost looked like rubber or plastic. He wore a patchy black and white clown outfit with striped sleeves and socks. His body itself was grotesque, his long arms hanging down past his waist. The way he was poised made him look almost boneless, like a rag doll. He let out a sickening laugh, as if to let me know he was pleased with my reaction to his work. He then turned around slowly in front of James and began to laugh even more at the horrific sight he had laid out. That was enough to shake me from my terror. I snapped, "Get away from him, you bastard!" I rushed at him, raising the knife above my head and stabbed down at him. But as soon as the knife touched him, he disappeared in a cloud of black smoke. The knife passed right through and pierced my son's still beating heart, splashing warm blood on my face. No. What have I done? My baby. I killed my baby. I immediately fell to my knees, and I could hear sirens in the distance growing louder. My boy. my sweet baby grow. I promised Mommy would protect you, but I failed. I'm sorry, James. I'm so sorry. Police soon arrived to find me in front of my son, still wielding the knife covered in my baby's blood. The trial was short. Insanity. I was placed in the Frapolis house for the criminally insane, where I have been for the past 2 months. It's not so bad here. The only reason I'm awake now is because someone is playing Pop Goes the Weasel outside my window. I'll talk to the orderlies about it in the morning. And that's the end. A short summary. So James, her son, was playing outside, and his mom asked him who was he talking to, because he wasn't told. He was the only person outside. And he told his mom he was talking to Laughing Jack. The next day, he was outside on the sidewalk eating candy. And his mom asked him, "What kind of candy are you eating?" And he said, "Laughing Jack gave it to me." She was like, she didn't believe him at first. And then later, the dog got killed. And James was terrified. So she was like, "I know it's probably Laughing Jack, but I don't care who it is. No one's gonna kill my baby." But honestly, I think what she should have done is let him sleep with her. So that way she may have prevented James from dying. But in the end, she stabbed her son by accident. But she did claim that it was Laughing Jack, and it was by accident. Of course, people didn't believe it was Laughing Jack, so they're like, "Obviously you're insane, so we're gonna put you into the insane asylum, where criminally insane people are." But honestly, my thoughts get sad. They were just having a good life, and Laughing Jack decided to ruin it. Some people, a lot of creepypastas have been made, but then a lot of people claimed they have seen these creepypastas. Now, have any guys seen Laughing Jack? If so, please, I think I have a business email. Email me some creepy stories. If you have any terrifying creepy stories that happen to you, email me it. I'll leave my email in the description below. And if you have any creepy stories you want me to read, tell me too. I'll see you in the next one. Remember, stay creepy, love you, and bye-bye.